The sterile, recycled air of an airport terminal holds a million silent stories of hellos and goodbyes. But on a cold November afternoon at Chicago O'Hare, one story was about to be told out loud. It's the story of Dr. Evelyn Reed, a mother whose simple request to sit next to her anxious 10-year-old son was met with a wall of corporate indifference and thinly veiled prejudice. It's the story of a gate manager whose power trip set the stage for a confrontation at 30,000 feet. But most importantly, it's the story of what happens when a single, calm voice of authority cuts through the noise, delivering an announcement that would not only change the flight, but ignite a firestorm of reckoning that no one saw coming. The cacophony of Chicago O'Hare International Airport was a familiar kind of chaos for Dr. Evelyn Reed. As a pediatric cardiologist, she was accustomed to navigating high-stress environments with a practiced calm. She navigated the bustling C concourse of Terminal 1 with the same steady purpose, one hand firmly on the handle of her rolling carry-on, the other resting reassuringly on the shoulder of her 10-year-old son, Julian. Julian, a bright boy, with wide, curious eyes that seemed to absorb the world in startling detail, clutched a well-worn book about the constellations. Flying was a necessary evil for him. The wonder of soaring above the clouds was always at war with the primal fear of the takeoff roar and the unsettling shudder of turbulence. The only thing that truly anchored him was the physical presence of his mother. Her hand to hold during takeoff, her calm voice explaining the mechanics of flight during a bumpy patch. These were his anchors in the sky. Evelyn was on her way to a medical conference in San Francisco, where she was the keynote speaker. It was a significant honor, a culmination of years of research into congenital heart defects. Bringing Julian was a special treat, a chance to visit the famous Exploratorium and look through the powerful telescopes at the Chabot Space and Science Center in Oakland. His excitement was a fragile, beautiful thing she was determined to protect. They had checked in online the night before, but the system had inexplicably assigned them seats apart, Evelyn in 12B, a middle seat, and Julian in 19F, a window seat several rows back. Evelyn had assumed it was a simple glitch, the kind a gate agent could fix in under a minute. It was a common occurrence in modern air travel. Families get separated by algorithms. A quick, polite conversation usually resolved it. They approached the gate G11 for Transcontinental Air Flight 782. The area was already crowded, a sea of anxious faces, bored children, and seasoned business travelers. The gate agent, a harried-looking man in his late 20s named Tom, was typing furiously at his computer, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. "Excuse me," Evelyn began, her voice warm but clear. "I'm Dr. Reed, and this is my son Julian. We're on Flight 782. The system assigned us seats apart, and I was hoping you could help us find two together." He's 10 and a bit of an anxious flyer. Tom didn't look up from his screen. "Flight's full. Very full. Seating is locked. Nothing I can do." His words were clipped, dismissive. Evelyn's smile didn't falter. She was used to dealing with stressed-out interns and terrified parents. Patience was her superpower. "I understand it's a full flight, but could you just take a look? Perhaps someone would be willing to switch. My son is a minor, and it's airline policy to seat young children with a parent." Tom finally sighed and looked up, his eyes betraying a deep weariness. "Ma'am, policy is to try. The system auto-assigned. There are no two seats together. The best I can do is ask the flight attendants once you're on board." "With all due respect," Evelyn pressed gently, "it's much more disruptive to handle this once everyone is boarding." It would be so much easier to sort it out now. Can you just see if there's a passenger in 12A or 12C who is traveling alone and might be willing to switch with my son's seat in 19F? This simple logical request seemed to break something in him. He shook his head, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. I can't reassign a seat without the passenger present. I can't move people around like chess pieces. It's not that simple. Julian, sensing the tension, squeezed his mother's hand. It's okay, Mom. I can be brave. Evelyn's heart ached at his words. He shouldn't have to be. This was a simple problem with a simple solution. I appreciate that, sweetie, but it's better if we're together. She turned back to Tom. Could you please call your supervisor? Perhaps they have more system privileges. This was the final straw for Tom. He let out an exasperated breath and reached for his radio. Brenda, I have a situation at G11. A passenger is insisting on a seat change on the fully booked SFO flight. A few moments later, a woman with a severe blonde bob immaculate uniform and a name tag that read Brenda Hatcher Duty Manager strode towards the desk. She moved with an air of self-importance that seemed to part the sea of passengers. She didn't look at Evelyn or Julian. She addressed Tom directly. What's the problem? She asked, her voice sharp and devoid of warmth. Tom gestured vaguely towards Evelyn. This passenger was assigned separate seats from her son. She wants me to move other passengers to accommodate her. Brenda Hatcher finally turned her gaze on Evelyn. It was a cold, appraising look. She scanned Evelyn from head to toe, her elegant but comfortable travel clothes, her professional demeanor, her black skin, and a subtle, almost imperceptible shift occurred in her expression. A mask of unyielding authority slipped into place. Ma'am Brenda began, her tone laced with condescension. The gate agent has already informed you that the flight is full. Seat assignments were finalized 24 hours ago. We cannot rearrange the entire cabin because you failed to select seats in advance. I did select seats in advance, Evelyn stated calmly, holding Brenda's gaze. We selected 2 seats together. Your system reassigned them without notice. It was likely an equipment change, but the result is that my 10-year-old child is now seated alone. I'm simply asking for the standard assistance provided to families in this situation. Brenda's lips tightened into a thin line. The standard assistance is to ask for volunteers on board. We are not bumping a paid passenger from their assigned seat for you. It's not fair to them. The implication hung in the air that Evelyn's request was unreasonable, that she was asking for special treatment, that she was somehow trying to cheat the system. The quiet efficiency of the boarding area had now been punctured by this small pocket of conflict. Other passengers were beginning to look over, their curiosity piqued. Evelyn felt a familiar, weary anger begin to simmer beneath her calm exterior. She had faced this kind of dismissive authority before. It was a carefully constructed wall of rules and regulations, deployed not to ensure fairness, but to enforce a power dynamic. I am also a paid passenger, Evelyn said, her voice dropping slightly but losing none of its clarity. As is my son. And I am not asking you to bump anyone. I am asking you to do your job and facilitate a simple switch. It happens on every single flight. Please just look at the manifest. See who is next to me. See if they're traveling alone. It's a simple fix. Brenda Hatcher crossed her arms. The system is locked. There is nothing more I can do for you at this gate. You will have to take it up with the cabin crew. She turned away, a clear dismissal. The storm had not yet broken, but Evelyn could feel the barometric pressure dropping. The air was thick with something more than just the usual airport tension. It was the charged atmosphere of a battle of wills, one that Evelyn had no intention of losing, not when her son's well-being was at stake. The pre-boarding announcement for families with small children and passengers needing extra assistance echoed through the terminal. Evelyn and Julian stood to the side, their boarding passes feeling like useless slips of paper in their hands. The interaction with Brenda Hatcher had left a sour taste in Evelyn's mouth, a cold knot of frustration tightening in her stomach. It was the casual, unmovable nature of the refusal that was so galling. It wasn't a matter of logistics. It was a matter of will. Why is she so mean? Mom. Julian whispered, his voice small. He had picked up on the undercurrents, the unspoken hostility that his mother was trying to deflect. Evelyn squeezed his shoulder, forcing a reassuring smile. She's just having a stressful day, honey. We'll sort it out. Don't you worry. But she was worried. Brenda's dismissiveness felt personal pointed. As the first boarding group was called, Evelyn saw her opportunity. A kind-faced man in his 60s, holding a boarding pass for seat 12A, was approaching the gate. He was traveling alone. This was her chance to bypass the managerial stonewall and appeal to simple human decency. "Excuse me, sir," Evelyn said, stepping forward politely. "I'm so sorry to bother you. My name is Evelyn Reed. I believe you're in seat 12. The man whose name tag on his briefcase read George Henderson stopped and smiled. "That I am. Heading home. I'm in 12. Evelyn explained, "But my 10-year-old son here has been seated rows away in 19F. He gets quite anxious during flights. I was wondering if you would be terribly inconvenienced by swapping your aisle seat for his window seat." Mr. Henderson's face softened as he looked at Julian, who was trying to look brave, but was failing to hide his nervousness. "Oh, of course. Not a problem at all, my dear. I'd be happy to. A window seat is just fine by me. It's a clear day might see the Rockies." Relief washed over Evelyn so intensely, it was almost dizzying. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your kindness." They approached the podium together, where Brenda Hatcher was now overseeing the boarding process with an iron fist. "Excuse me, Ms. Hatcher." Evelyn said, her voice buoyed by renewed hope. "This is Mr. Henderson from 12A. He has very kindly agreed to switch seats with my son." Brenda looked from Evelyn to Mr. Henderson, and her expression curdled. She saw a problem being solved without her authority, a situation slipping from her control. "No," she said flatly. The word hung in the air, sharp and final. Mr. Henderson looked baffled. "I'm sorry, what I'm happy to move. It's no trouble." Brenda turned her steely gaze on him. "Sir, with all due respect, you cannot voluntarily switch seats before boarding. It messes up the weight and balance calculations and the passenger manifest for security. All passengers must board and sit in their assigned seats. Any changes must be handled by the flight crew after the cabin door is closed and the aircraft is balanced." It was a masterful use of jargon designed to sound official and non-negotiable. But Evelyn knew it was nonsense. A simple seat swap of two passengers of similar build on a Boeing 757 would have a negligible, if any, effect on weight and balance, and the manifest could be updated by the gate agent in seconds. "That's absurd," Evelyn stated, her patience finally fraying. "You and I both know that's not true. Gate agents facilitate these changes 100 times a day. This gentleman is agreeing to the swap right here in front of you. You can simply reissue the boarding passes." Brenda's eyes narrowed. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice into a menacingly sweet tone. "Are you questioning my authority on FAA regulations, ma'am? I am the manager on duty. My priority is the safety and security of this flight. Your personal seating preference does not supersede federal protocol." She was weaponizing policy. Every rule, every regulation was becoming a brick in the wall she was building between Evelyn and a solution. The issue was no longer about a mother and son. It had become a raw power struggle. Brenda was enjoying this, Evelyn realized with a sickening lurch. She was enjoying the power to say no, the power to make Evelyn's journey more difficult. Mr. Henderson, clearly uncomfortable, tried again. "Look, miss, it's really no big deal. I don't want to cause any trouble. Let the boy sit with his mother." Sir Brenda snapped her voice, losing its faux sweetness. "If you continue to interfere with the boarding process, I will have you removed. Please scan your boarding pass and proceed to your assigned seat." Thoroughly cowed and embarrassed, Mr. Henderson gave Evelyn an apologetic look and shuffled forward, disappearing down the jet bridge. Evelyn felt a surge of cold fury. This was no longer about procedure. This was a deliberate act of obstruction. She looked at Julian, whose face was now etched with worry and confusion. He was watching her, trusting her to fix this. Taking a deep breath, she centered herself. She would not lose her composure. She would not give this woman the satisfaction. "Ms. Hatcher," Evelyn said, her voice dangerously calm. "Let me be very clear. My son is 10 years old. Your airline's own contract of carriage states that you will make every reasonable effort to seat children under 13 with their accompanying adult. You have refused to even look at the seating chart. You have actively prevented a willing passenger from swapping seats. You are not following policy. You are creating a hostile situation for a paying customer and her child. I want your full name and your employee ID number. I will be filing a formal complaint." For the first time, a flicker of something uncertainty, perhaps even fear, crossed Brenda's face. The mention of a formal complaint, the calm, articulate way Evelyn dismantled her arguments, had finally pierced her armor. But it was immediately replaced by a doubling down of her aggression. "My name is on my badge," she sneered. "And if you continue with this belligerent attitude, you won't be filing a complaint. You'll be talking to airport security. We have a zero-tolerance policy for passenger aggression." She had twisted Evelyn's calm, firm advocacy into a threat. She was painting Evelyn as the aggressor, the angry black woman, a tired, toxic stereotype that Evelyn had fought against her entire professional life. It was a low, calculated blow designed to silence and intimidate. The line of passengers behind them was growing, the murmur of their conversations a backdrop to this tense drama. Evelyn was aware of their eyes on her son. The humiliation was a physical weight. She was a respected doctor, a keynote speaker, a loving mother. And here in this public space, she was being reduced to a problem, a nuisance, an aggressive passenger by a woman in a polyester suit. The wall Brenda had built felt insurmountable, but Evelyn knew she couldn't back down. Not for her own pride, but for the bewildered little boy holding her hand, who was learning a very ugly lesson about the world. The final boarding call for Flight 782 blared over the speakers, a jarring sound that amplified Evelyn's sense of urgency. Nearly every other passenger had filed down the jet bridge. It was just them, Brenda Hatcher, and the junior gate agent, Tom, who now looked as if he wished the floor would swallow him whole. Evelyn and Julian stood isolated in the now empty seating area, a spotlight of public scrutiny shining on them. Brenda stood at the podium, arms crossed, a silent sentinel of obstruction. She was waiting for Evelyn to concede, to accept the unacceptable seating and board the plane in defeat. "Mom, are we not going to San Francisco?" Julian asked, his voice trembling. The initial excitement of the trip had completely evaporated, replaced by the raw anxiety of the conflict he was witnessing. "We are going, sweetie." "I promise." Evelyn whispered her resolve, hardening into something akin to diamond. She would not be broken by this. She walked back to the podium, placing her and Julian's boarding passes on the counter. She looked directly into Brenda's eyes. "Ms. Hatcher, you have left me with no other option. We will not be boarding this aircraft until we are provided with 2 seats together. You can rebook us on the next flight, or you can find a solution on this one. But my 10-year-old child will not be flying alone, surrounded by strangers. It is a matter of safety, and I will not compromise on it." It was an ultimatum, and Evelyn knew the risks. Brenda could call security. They could be banned from the airline. But the principle of the matter had become a mountain she was willing to die on. Brenda let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You are refusing to board. Is that what you're telling me?" She picked up her radio. "Dispatch, this is Duty Manager Hatcher at G11. We have 2 passengers refusing to board Flight 782. We may need to pull their luggage. Stand by." The threat was clear: comply or be left behind. Your vacation ruined your plans in tatters. From her seat in the back of the nearly full aircraft, a young woman named Isabella Rossi watched the drama unfold at the end of the jet bridge. A travel vlogger, with a modest but growing online following, Isabella had her phone in her hand, initially just to text her family. But when she saw the mother and son standing alone and the manager's rigid, aggressive posture, she instinctively hit record. She zoomed in, capturing the tense exchange, the mother's desperate but dignified plea, and the manager's cold refusal. She didn't know the details, but she knew injustice when she saw it. On board the plane, the flight attendants were starting to get anxious. The cabin was secure, but the door was still open, and the jet bridge was still attached. Chloe, a senior flight attendant, with a warm, empathetic demeanor, walked to the front of the plane and peered out. She saw Brenda in a standoff with a passenger and her young son. Chloe had seen Brenda in action before. She knew her reputation for being inflexible and power-hungry. Chloe stepped onto the jet bridge. "Brenda." "What's going on?" "Captain's asking for the final paperwork. We're going to miss our takeoff slot." Brenda didn't even look at her. Her focus was entirely on Evelyn. "We have a passenger who is refusing to take her assigned seat and is holding up the entire flight. Let me talk to her." Chloe offered her training in de-escalation kicking in. She approached Evelyn with a soft smile. "Hi there, I'm Chloe. I'm the lead flight attendant. Can you tell me what the problem is?" Evelyn quickly and calmly explained the situation, the system's error, the son's anxiety, the willing passenger who was forbidden from swapping, and Brenda's absolute refusal to offer any assistance. Chloe's expression filled with sympathy and understanding. "Oh goodness, that's a simple fix. Let me just see what I can do on my tablet." She started tapping at the screen, looking at the cabin layout. "Okay, I see the issue. But look, we have 2 passengers in row 22 who are traveling together but were also separated. I'm sure I can talk to them and Mr. Henderson. We can do a 3-way swap. It's not a problem at all. We do this all the time." It was the solution Evelyn had been asking for, a simple application of common sense and customer service. But before Chloe could take another step, Brenda intervened, her voice like ice. "Chloe, you will do no such thing. This is a gate issue, not an in-flight issue. I am the manager in charge of this departure, and I have made my decision. The passenger manifest is locked. I will not have you undermining my authority." Chloe was stunned into silence. A gate manager pulling rank on a lead flight attendant over a customer service issue was a serious breach of professional courtesy. Brenda was making this personal. "Brenda, for goodness sake," Chloe pleaded in a hushed tone. "It's a 10-year-old boy. Let's just solve the problem and get the plane out." "The problem," Brenda said, her voice rising now, directed squarely at Evelyn again, "is that some people think the rules don't apply to them. They think they can just demand things and disrupt everything for everyone else." She looked at Julian, a look of profound annoyance on her face, as if his very presence was an inconvenience. That look directed at her son was what finally shattered Evelyn's composure. The carefully constructed dam of her patience broke. "Do not look at my child that way," Evelyn said, her voice low and trembling with a righteous fury. "He has been more polite and patient than any adult here. This is not about rules. This is about you. You have refused every reasonable solution. You have belittled me and dismissed my concerns. You have created this situation entirely on your own. Now, for the last time, are you going to help us? Or are you going to force me to take this to a level you will deeply regret?" The standoff had reached its zenith. The air in the jet bridge was thick with tension. Tom was frozen. Chloe was powerless, and Brenda's face was a mask of rage. She was about to press the call button on her radio, likely for airport police, to have Evelyn and her son physically removed. The flight to San Francisco, the medical conference, the trip to the exploratorium, it was all about to vanish. And then a new figure appeared at the end of the jet bridge. A man in a crisp white pilot's uniform, with 4 gold stripes on the epaulets, stepped out from the cockpit door. He was tall, with kind eyes and a calm, authoritative presence that instantly changed the atmosphere. It was Captain David Peterson. He took in the scene in a single glance. The furious manager, the frustrated flight attendant, and the mother and son standing alone, looking exhausted but defiant. What exactly, the captain asked, his voice even and steady, but carrying an undeniable weight of command, "is holding up my aircraft." The arrival of Captain David Peterson was like a sudden change in atmospheric pressure. His presence commanded an immediate, unspoken respect that Brenda Hatcher's manufactured authority could not hope to match. He was the ultimate arbiter on his aircraft, and everyone on the jet bridge knew it. Brenda's furious expression faltered, replaced by a sycophantic smile as she turned to face him. "Captain Peterson, no problem at all. Just a minor passenger issue we're handling. We'll be closing the door in just a moment." She tried to wave the situation away, as if it were a triviality. Captain Peterson didn't smile back. His gaze shifted from Brenda to Evelyn and Julian. He had a knack for reading people, a skill honed over 30 years of flying, first in the Air Force and then for commercial airlines. He saw the defiant fear in Evelyn's eyes and the genuine distress on her son's face. This was not a minor issue. "I'll be the judge of that," he said calmly. He walked past Brenda, closing the distance to Evelyn. He crouched down slightly to be on eye level with Julian. "Hey there, Chief." "What's your name, Julian?" the boy mumbled, intimidated by the uniform, but reassured by the man's kind eyes. Julian, the captain, repeated, nodding. "I'm Captain Peterson. It's my job to make sure everyone on our flight is safe and comfortable." "Is there a problem?" Julian looked at his mom, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. "The lady won't let me sit with my mom," he said simply. His child's honesty, cutting through all the bureaucratic nonsense. The captain's eyes met Evelyn's. "Ma'am," he prompted. Evelyn, feeling a sliver of hope, for the first time in an hour, laid out the facts with the precision of a surgeon delivering a diagnosis. She explained the initial seat separation, her attempts to resolve it, Mr. Henderson's willing offer to switch, and Brenda's steadfast refusal to allow any solution, citing non-existent regulations about weight balance and security manifests. She relayed the entire maddening ordeal in a calm, factual tone, making no accusations, simply stating what had happened. Captain Peterson listened intently, his expression unreadable, but his focus absolute. He didn't interrupt. When she was finished, he stood up to his full height and turned slowly to face Brenda Hatcher. "Ms. Hatcher." He began, his voice still quiet, but now laced with steel. "Is what this passenger telling me accurate? Did you forbid another passenger from voluntarily swapping seats with her child?" Brenda seemed to shrink under his gaze. The bluster and arrogance she had shown Evelyn completely evaporated, replaced by a defensive posture. "Captain, with all due respect, I was following protocol. The manifest was locked. It's a full flight. I am responsible for a safe and orderly departure." "You are Captain Peterson." Cut her off, his voice sharp. "And part of an orderly departure is using common sense to resolve customer service issues before they delay a flight with 180 other passengers on it. You are telling me that you could not reissue 2 boarding passes?" "My system access is limited after a certain point," Brenda stammered, grasping at straws. "Then you call an operations agent who does have access." The captain countered, his knowledge of ground procedures clearly superior to hers. "Or you simply note the swap on the manifest you hand to my first officer. Or you allow the flight crew to handle it, as Miss Chloe here was attempting to do. You had multiple solutions. You chose none of them. Instead, you chose to delay this departure and cause distress to a child. Why?" The question hung in the air, a direct challenge to her competence and her motives. Brenda paled. She had no answer. Her entire wall of policy had been dismantled brick by someone whose authority she could not question. I was concerned about fairness to the other passengers," she finally managed, her voice weak. Captain Peterson shook his head in disbelief. "Fairness? You think it's fair to separate a 10-year-old from his mother on a 5-hour flight? You think it's fair to refuse a simple, kind gesture from another passenger? That's not your definition of fairness, Ms. Hatcher. That's your definition of obstruction." He turned to Chloe, the flight attendant. "Chloe, please escort Dr. Reed and her son onto the aircraft. Find Mr. Henderson in 12A, and the young man's seat in 19F. You have my full authority to reseat whoever you need, to wherever you need to ensure this family sits together. If anyone has an issue, you tell them to talk to me personally." "Yes," Captain Chloe said, a broad smile of relief spreading across her face. She gestured warmly to Evelyn and Julian. "Come with me. Let's get you settled." As Evelyn walked past Brenda, she didn't look at her. There was no triumph in her expression, only a profound, bone-deep weariness. The fight had taken its toll. All she wanted was to sit down, hold her son's hand, and feel the engines start to roar, the signal that this ordeal was finally over. But Captain Peterson wasn't finished with Brenda. As Evelyn and Julian stepped onto the plane, they heard his final words to the duty manager, delivered in a low, unwavering tone that carried the full weight of his command. "You and I will be having a conversation with the station chief as soon as I land in San Francisco. Your behavior today was unacceptable and unprofessional. It does not reflect the standards of this airline, and it will not happen again on my watch. Now get me my final paperwork so I can fly my plane." He turned without waiting for a reply and strode into the cockpit. Brenda Hatcher was left alone on the jet bridge, her face a storm of humiliation and fury. She had picked a fight with the wrong passenger and been publicly dressed down by the one person in the airport she could not overrule. The pilot's intervention was decisive and absolute, but no one, not even Evelyn or the captain himself, could have predicted the seismic aftershocks that were about to follow. Stepping from the tense, sterile atmosphere of the jet bridge into the warm, bustling cabin of the Boeing 757 was like entering another world. Evelyn felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on her and Julian. They were the cause of the delay, the protagonists of the drama everyone had been craning their necks to see. She felt a flush of embarrassment, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of quiet vindication. Chloe, the flight attendant, was wonderful. She led them down the aisle with a comforting hand on Julian's back. "Don't you mind any of these folks?" she whispered. They'd all do the same for their kids. She paused at row 12 and spoke quietly to Mr. Henderson, who was already half out of his seat, ready to move. "Sir, thank you for your patience. If you'd be so kind as to take the seat in 19F, we'd be very grateful. Anything for the cause." He winked at Julian, who managed a small, shy smile in return. Evelyn and Julian slid into their seats, 12A and 12B. The simple act of sitting down together felt like a monumental victory. Julian immediately grabbed her hand, his small fingers intertwining with hers, a silent communication of relief and love. "Thank you, Evelyn," mouthed to Chloe, who simply nodded and continued with her pre-flight duties. The cabin door closed with a solid, reassuring thud. The engines began to whine, spooling up for departure. The safety demonstration video played on the seatback screens. For all intents and purposes, the crisis was over. It had been a localized, intensely personal battle, fought and won at the gate. But Captain David Peterson felt differently. He knew that what had happened on the jet bridge wasn't just a customer service failure. It was a failure of humanity, and it had happened under his command on his flight. The other 180 passengers only knew they were delayed because of a passenger issue. He felt they deserved to know the truth. He believed that silence in the face of such petty cruelty was a form of complicity. Just as the plane began its slow pushback from the gate, the PA system chimed. "Good afternoon, folks. This is your captain speaking from the flight deck." His voice was calm, resonant, filling the cabin. "First, I'd like to welcome you aboard Transcontinental Flight 782 with service to San Francisco. We're looking at a flight time of about 4 hours and 35 minutes once we're airborne, and the weather looks good all the way to the coast." He paused. This was the standard friendly greeting passengers expected. What came next was not. "Secondly, I want to sincerely apologize for the delay in our departure this afternoon. I know your time is valuable, and we failed to meet our on-time promise today. I feel it's important for you to understand why." A hush fell over the cabin. Passengers looked up from their books and phones. This was highly unusual. Our departure was held up due to a seating issue involving a mother and her 10-year-old son. The captain continued, his voice steady and deliberate. "And I want to be very clear about what happened. This was not the fault of the passengers. It was the result of a failure at our gate to show basic decency and common sense." Evelyn's eyes widened. She looked around the cabin. Everyone was listening, captivated. "This airline," the captain's voice grew stronger, filled with a conviction that resonated through the speakers, "has a contract with every one of you. It's not just about getting you from point A to point B. It's about doing so with respect, with dignity, and with compassion. Today, at our gate, one of our managers chose to enforce a rigid interpretation of policy over the simple human need of a child to feel safe with his parent. She actively prevented another passenger's kind offer to switch seats. She created a stressful and humiliating situation for a family for no good reason other than it seems to exert her own authority. In the back of the plane, Isabella Rossi, the vlogger, discreetly lifted her phone and started recording again, capturing the stunned faces of the passengers around her. The men and women. I have the privilege of flying with your flight attendants. Your first officers, the ground crew, are professionals dedicated to your safety and comfort. The behavior exhibited by that manager today does not represent who we are. It does not represent what Transcontinental Air stands for. On behalf of the airline, and as the captain of this aircraft, I want to publicly apologize to the mother and son who were treated so poorly. No passenger should ever have to fight that hard for a simple act of human kindness. He paused one last time, letting the weight of his words settle. We are all human beings first, and passengers and employees second. Sometimes it's important to be reminded of that. We'll make up some time in the air. Now sit back, relax, and we'll have you on the ground in California shortly. The PA system clicked off. For a moment there was absolute silence. Then a passenger in the row behind Evelyn started to clap. It was a slow, deliberate applause. Another passenger joined in, then another. Within seconds, the entire cabin erupted in a wave of spontaneous, heartfelt applause. It wasn't just for the captain. It was for Evelyn. It was for the principle of the thing. Passengers turned and smiled at her. A woman across the aisle gave her a thumbs up. The man in 12C, who had been silent until now, leaned over. "Good for you for standing your ground," he said. Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes. Tears of relief, of gratitude, of a profound sense of shared humanity. All the anger and humiliation she had felt melted away, replaced by the warmth of this unexpected solidarity. She looked at Julian, and he was beaming, his earlier fear completely gone. He understood. He had seen his mother fight for him, and he had just heard the most important person on the plane declare that she was right. The captain's announcement had transformed a private struggle into a public statement. It was no longer just about 2 seats. It was about right and wrong. And in doing so, he had unknowingly armed a plane load of witnesses and lit the fuse on a viral firestorm that would soon bring Brenda Hatcher's world crashing down. By the time Flight 782 touched down smoothly at San Francisco International Airport, the digital world was already on fire. Isabella Rossi had wasted no time. During the flight, she had used the plane's Wi-Fi to edit her 2 pieces of footage, the tense standoff at the gate and the stunned cabin listening to the pilot's announcement. She packaged them into a compelling 2-minute video, gave it a simple, powerful title. Airline manager refuses to let black mother and son sit together. Pilot's announcement changes everything, and uploaded it to her social media channels with the hashtags Transcontinental Fail Flying, while Black and Captain Hero. The video's velocity was staggering. It was shared by a handful of her followers, then by their followers, and then it was picked up by a major travel blogger with millions of views. From there, it exploded. The juxtaposition of Brenda Hatcher's cold obstruction with Captain Peterson's impassioned moral clarity was potent. It was a perfectly packaged narrative of injustice and redemption. Before Evelyn and Julian had even collected their luggage, the video had 100,000 views. By the time they checked into their hotel, it was over 1 million, and climbing, with news outlets and media aggregators already ripping the footage and writing their own stories. The corporate headquarters of Transcontinental Air in Dallas, Texas, went into full-blown crisis mode. On a Monday morning, Richard Sterling, the sharp-suited vice president of public relations, walked into his office to find his inbox overflowing and his phone ringing off the hook. The video was everywhere. His team was already in a panic. "What do we know?" Sterling demanded, striding into the emergency meeting he'd called in the PR war room. A young social media analyst pointed to a massive screen showing the cascading negative comments. "It's bad, Richard. Really bad. The name Brenda Hatcher is trending. People have already found her LinkedIn profile. The narrative is set. Our employee is a racist who abuses her power, and our pilot is a hero who had to publicly shame her to get her to do the right thing." "And is that narrative accurate?" Sterling asked, his voice tight. An internal affairs liaison piped up. "We've pulled the preliminary report from the Chicago station chief. It corroborates the passenger's story. Captain Peterson formally logged a complaint against duty manager Hatcher for unprofessional conduct and delaying a flight without cause. According to his statement, she was deliberately obstructionist and created a hostile environment. Multiple employees, including the lead flight attendant, have already given statements supporting the captain's account." Sterling swore under his breath. This wasn't some ambiguous, he said, she said, situation. This was a slam dunk. The evidence was overwhelming, and it was playing out in front of millions of people online. "Where is Hatcher now?" he asked. "Placed on immediate unpaid administrative leave pending a full investigation," the liaison replied. "The union has already been notified." Sterling paced the room, his mind racing. They couldn't fight this. They had to get ahead of it. "Okay, here's the plan. First, find the passenger, Dr. Evelyn Reed. Get her on the phone. I want to apologize to her personally. Offer her a full refund travel vouchers for future flights, a sincere, heartfelt apology from the highest levels. No excuses. We own this completely." He pointed at another team member. "Second draft, a public statement. We praise Captain Peterson for his leadership and for embodying the true values of our company. We state that the manager's behavior is under investigation and that we have a zero-tolerance policy for this kind of conduct. We are not the company that manager portrayed us to be. We are the company that pilot works for. That's our message." "What about Brenda?" someone asked. Sterling's face was grim. "Her career with this airline is over. The investigation is a formality. You can't recover from something like this. She's a liability we can no longer afford." Meanwhile, in her San Francisco hotel room, Evelyn's phone was buzzing incessantly. News reporters were somehow finding her number. Friends and family from across the country were calling, having seen the video. It was disorienting. She had fought a private battle, but the world had tuned in for the public execution. She finally watched the video Isabella had posted. Seeing it from an outsider's perspective was jarring. She saw her own exhaustion, her forced calm, but she also saw her strength. She saw Brenda's sneering condescension in high definition. And then she heard the captain's voice fill the cabin again, and felt the same wave of gratitude wash over her. An hour later, her hotel phone rang. It was Richard Sterling from Transcontinental Air. He was profusely apologetic, his voice dripping with corporate contrition. He offered refunds vouchers and a promise that action would be taken. "Mr. Sterling," Evelyn said, cutting through his rehearsed speech. "I appreciate your call, but I don't want vouchers. I don't want free flights. What I want is an assurance that you will use this incident, which was deeply humiliating for me and distressing for my son, as a catalyst for real change. I want to know what you are going to do to ensure no other person, regardless of their race or background, is ever made to feel the way I was made to feel by your employee today. Her demand shifted the conversation from damage control to meaningful action. Sterling, momentarily taken aback, promised to implement new de-escalation and implicit bias training for all customer-facing employees. He offered to fly Evelyn to Dallas to consult with their training teams. Evelyn agreed. This was never about revenge or compensation. It was about making things better. The corporate reckoning was swift and decisive, driven by the undeniable power of a viral video. Brenda Hatcher was the clear villain, Captain Peterson the hero, and Evelyn the dignified victim. But as the dust settled, the story of the consequences, the true hard karma, was only just beginning to unfold. 1 week after the incident, Brenda Hatcher received a registered letter. It was her official termination from Transcontinental Air. The internal investigation had been swift and brutal. The statements from Chloe, Tom the gate agent, several passengers, and Captain Peterson's scathing report, combined with the viral video, left no room for defense. The union provided a lawyer, but even he advised her that her case was hopeless. She was fired for cause gross misconduct, endangerment of company reputation, and failure to perform her duties. Brenda's world collapsed. For 25 years, her identity had been inextricably linked to her job. She had started as a ticketing agent and clawed her way up to duty manager. The uniform, the authority, the power to enforce rules, these were the pillars of her self-worth. Now they were gone. Her immediate reaction was rage, not remorse. She saw herself as the victim. In her mind, Evelyn Reed was an entitled, argumentative passenger who had goaded her. Captain Peterson was a showboating moralist who had thrown her under the bus to look like a hero. The world, amplified by social media, had judged her without knowing her, without understanding the pressure she was under. Fueled by this self-pitying anger, she hired a lawyer and filed a lawsuit for wrongful termination, defamation, and emotional distress. It was a disastrous move. The legal discovery process was merciless. Transcontinental's lawyers dug into her employment history, and a clear, damning pattern emerged. Over the past decade, Brenda Hatcher had been the subject of 17 formal passenger complaints. 12 of those complaints were filed by people of color. Phrases like condescending, unhelpful, hostile, and abusive use of authority appeared again and again. She had never been formally disciplined because the complaints were always individual incidents, and she was an expert at framing them as passengers, failing to follow policy. But viewed together, they painted a portrait of a manager who consistently used her power to intimidate and belittle with a clear bias towards minority customers. Her lawsuit was dismissed in summary judgment. The judge's ruling was scathing, calling her legal action frivolous and an attempt to profit from her own misconduct. The failed lawsuit only generated another round of negative press, cementing her reputation as the infamous gate manager, Brenda. The hard karma, however, went far beyond the loss of her job and a failed lawsuit. It was more insidious. The notoriety from the viral video made her unemployable in the airline industry, the only industry she knew. No other airline would touch her. Even jobs in adjacent fields like hotel management or logistics were impossible to get. Her name was now toxic. A simple Google search brought up dozens of articles and the video of her at her absolute worst. Her personal life began to unravel. Friends, embarrassed by the association, stopped calling. Her sister, who lived in another state, told her she couldn't visit for Christmas because her husband was uncomfortable with the situation. The community she had lived in for years now felt hostile. She would see neighbors whisper when she went to the grocery store. People would recognize her and pull out their phones, trying to sneak a photo. She became a prisoner in her own home. The shame and isolation, a constant suffocating weight. Months later, a local investigative journalist did a "Where is she now?" piece. In a brief on-camera interview on her front porch, Brenda looked like a different person. Her severe bob was unkempt, her face pale and drawn. She spoke of her regret, but it was still tinged with bitterness. "One bad day," she said, her voice cracking. "You have one bad day after 25 years of service, and the whole world decides you're a monster. They don't know what it's like." But the reporter had done his homework. He had spoken to Tom, the original gate agent. Tom, who had since been promoted, confessed that Brenda's one bad day was in fact her every day. "We all knew who she was," Tom said off the record. "We called her the Wall, because no matter how reasonable a request was, her first answer was always no. She seemed to enjoy it. What happened with Dr. Reed? That was just the day she finally got caught." For Evelyn Reed, the aftermath was profoundly different. She accepted Transcontinental's invitation to consult on their new training modules. She brought her professional experience as a doctor, her understanding of how to communicate under pressure, how to show empathy, how to de-escalate fear to the corporate world. The program she helped design, focusing on humanity first, policy second, was implemented company-wide. Captain Peterson was officially commended by the airline for his decisive leadership. He received thousands of letters and emails from people around the world thanking him for his integrity. He and Evelyn stayed in touch, forming an unlikely friendship, forged in the crucible of that day at O'Hare. The true lasting impact, however, was on Julian. The trip to San Francisco became a core memory. He marveled at the giant telescopes at the Chabot Observatory, his fear of flying replaced by a renewed fascination with the stars. But more importantly, he had learned a vital lesson. He saw his mother refuse to be silenced. He saw a stranger, Mr. Henderson, offer kindness for no reason. He saw a man in a position of ultimate authority. Captain Peterson use his power not to enforce rules, but to enforce decency. He learned that while there is ugliness and prejudice in the world, there is also courage, integrity, and a vast interconnected community of people who will stand up for what is right. The karma that found Brenda Hatcher wasn't a supernatural force. It was simply the logical, inevitable consequence of a life lived with a closed heart. It was the bill for years of petty cruelties finally coming due. And the positive ripple effect that surrounded Evelyn Reed was the inverse of that equation, the result of a life lived with dignity, patience, and a fierce, unwavering belief that everyone deserves to be treated with respect. It was a real-life story that proved that sometimes the arc of the moral universe doesn't just bend toward justice, it gets a firm, decisive push from ordinary people choosing to do the extraordinary thing. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a seat on an airplane. It was a story about the clash between rigid authority and compassionate leadership, between casual prejudice and unshakable dignity. It's a powerful reminder that our daily choices, our small acts of kindness or cruelty, can have consequences that ripple further than we could ever imagine. Dr. Evelyn Reed's refusal to back down, coupled with Captain David Peterson's courageous stand for what was right, didn't just change one family's travel plans. It sparked a global conversation and forced a multi-billion-dollar corporation to re-examine its soul. If this story moved you, please give this video a like and share it with your friends. These are the kinds of stories that need to be heard. And don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you won't miss our next deep dive into real-life events where karma delivered its verdict. What did you think of the captain's announcement? Let us know in the comments below.